Japan is currently hosting the G7 summit in Hiroshima. It's the hometown of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. He's welcoming leaders from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom and the United States. Now, in the spotlight is the push for new sanctions targeting Russia's energy and military sectors because of its ongoing war against the Ukraine. Correspondent Chris Gilbert is in Tokyo. Chris, if you can hear me, thanks indeed for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, traditionally, the G7 summit of political and economic heavyweights, I mean, if you look at it, followed closely by many because of the outcomes they affect development aid, the fight against global poverty, investment worldwide. Does the Russia-Ukrainian issue this time around overshadow everything else?
Well, I mean, it certainly dominates the discussion. Whether it overshadows is questionable because, I believe the G7 members would argue that everything that they discuss is important. For Japan, for example, it's right on the doorstep of China. The Prime Minister Fumio Kishida here has said that the Ukraine war of today could be the Indo-Pacific of tomorrow, referring to Chinese military assertiveness around Taiwan, the potential for that to become a powder keg situation. And so it could be argued that it doesn't overshadow it, that lends to it. And so it is certainly a dominating event. It certainly dominates supply lines, global supply of goods, food security, a raft of issues that affect humanity around the world. It has shaken the economic foundation to its core, as the G7 has said. It threatens global stability. But at the moment, the G7 believes that it is facing, a raft of issues of global security. But of course, at the moment, number one, the paramount at the top would be Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And I want to go back to that issue in a moment, but it's interesting when you look at the background here that the economic might of the G7 is waning. In 1990, the group accounting for just over half of the world's GDP, it's now just under 30%. So you can understand why you have the inviting of so many of these other nations as guests, don't you?
Oh, you absolutely can. In terms of the G7, they want to remain a relevant institution. The G7 is 50 years old almost. The times have changed. They need to also change with the times. And so you do see, regular attendees and new attendees in the form of, South Africa's BRICS allies, Brazil and India as well, in particular, because, the BRICS alliance, along with South Africa, Russia and China, some reports say that it has overtaken the G7 in terms of total percentage, global percentage of GDP, and it certainly holds a much higher percentage of the world's population as well. And so the G7 really needs to reach out to what it refers to as the global south or developing countries. There's been a number of terms for these countries over the years. They're reaching out with offers of aid, of infrastructure, of development for a number of reasons. First of all, one of their goals is to diversify, or as they say, enhance supply lines away from China, but also they want a plurality of voices inside the tent. One political expert here in Tokyo even told me that they may be looking to rebuild a new G20, a very informal one that does not include China and Russia. So it is an absolutely crucial task here in front of the G7 to include these new voices, these up-and-coming voices and rising voices to ensure that they continue to set the global economic agenda.
Yeah, a strong statement coming out earlier today, Chris, with the G7 saying it will starve Russia of G7 technology, industrial equipment and services that support what it calls this war machine.
Yeah, it is a very strong statement, but that is the name of the game at the moment. The G7 in that same statement also said that they believe that the sanctions are working and that Russia is slowing down. Political scientists here in Tokyo say that if you look at the G7 a year ago, there were a lot of questions that there simply aren't now. Questions about how successful Russia would be in the campaigns, questions about where this was all going. And there does seem to be a political consensus that is being built in least of the the world of political scientists, that Russia is not making ground, Russia is not conquering. And so the G7 believes it has a chance now to really put the foot down, to starve it, as you said, and as the statement says, of the resources, of machinery, of technology that it needs to, as the G7 says, rebuild its war machine. But also it wants to just suck it dry of its finances, to be perfectly blunt, both from international financing, but also from its mineral and oil exports. And it also wants to, in the words of Joe Biden, hunt down those who are seeking to assist Russia to evade those sanctions. It wants the war over very quickly. James Cleverly, the UK foreign minister, has said quite bluntly that the G7 and the UK in particular is in this till the very end. They want it to happen as soon as possible, and the G7 believes that the longer that these sanctions take to suck dry or starve the Russia of the resources, the longer the war will go on for.
Yeah, and as I let you go, just beyond that, Chris, I see there's talk of sanctions against those groups accused of moving material to the front for Moscow.
Oh, sorry, can you just repeat that question one more time, please?
I'm saying it's quite interesting that there's talk of sanctions against those groups seen pushing material or moving material to the front for Moscow. So anyone seen to be aiding Moscow, then, I mean, also got a bit of a tough talking to in terms of what their statement says.
Oh, absolutely. Look, they are talking about, some kind of punishment or retribution or sanctions on these third parties, but they're also being incredibly vague about exactly who these third parties are. Now, this is of interest to South Africa in particular because just a couple of weeks ago, the US accused South Africa of aiding Russia by funneling arms into Russia, and also criticized South Africa a couple of months ago for taking part in, military exercises alongside Russia and China, to which South Africa responded, well, it's our right to conduct these military exercises just as it is any other country, particularly the United States or countries like Japan. And so, they do want to send a strong message. The G7 at the moment is all about sending strong messages because there's very little that it can do in effect as an organization. It is a series of bilateral relationships. They can have effect, but the G7 is about message sending. And the message it wants to send is we are with Ukraine, we are condemning Russia, we will continue to do so, and we will continue to oppose those who seek to assist Russia and, in their eyes, prolong the war.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Chris Gilbert talking to us from Tokyo. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us.